The dust kicked up around Clara Morgan's worn boots as she stood outside the Silver Spur Saloon in Tombstone, Arizona territory, clutching her 6-month-old son James against her chest, while the proprietor's words echoed in her mind like a death sentence. It was late September 1882, and the unforgiving sun beat down on the bustling mining town where fortunes were made and lost faster than a gunslinger could draw. But for Clara, opportunity seemed to slip through her fingers like sand no matter how tightly she tried to hold on. She had walked every street, knocked on every door, pleaded with every business owner from the mercantile to the boarding house to the newspaper office, and the answer was always the same variation of no, delivered with either pity or disgust, depending on who was doing the rejecting. Her husband Thomas had died 4 months ago in a mining accident up in the Dragoon Mountains, leaving her with nothing but debts, a baby, and a wagon with a broken axle she could not afford to fix. The other miners had taken up a collection that lasted her exactly 3 weeks before she was forced to sell everything she owned except the clothes on her back and the thin blanket wrapped around James. She had tried taking in laundry, but without a proper place to live or the ability to haul water while managing an infant, even that meager income source had dried up faster than a creek in August. "Nobody will hire a woman with a baby," she said, defeated, her voice cracking as she spoke to no one in particular, the words tumbling out as she sank down onto the wooden steps leading up to the saloon, too exhausted to care anymore about propriety or pride. Tears streamed down her sunburned cheeks, leaving clean tracks through the dust that coated her skin, and James began to fuss in her arms, sensing his mother's distress the way babies somehow always could. "You're hired starting today." The voice came from above her, deep and steady with a hint of Texas drawl that marked the speaker as a long way from home, and Clara looked up through her tears to see a tall man silhouetted against the bright sky, his weathered face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He wore typical cowboy attire, denim pants tucked into scuffed leather boots, a blue cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms, and a gun belt slung low on his hips in the practiced manner of someone who knew how to use the weapon but did not feel the need to advertise it. "What?" Clara blinked, certain she had misheard or that the sun had finally driven her mad, because men did not just offer employment to desperate women sitting on saloon steps covered in trail dust and holding crying babies. "I said you're hired." He stepped down to her level, and she could see him more clearly now. A man probably in his late 20s with dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar, hazel eyes that held an unexpected gentleness, and a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. "Name's Jack Brennan. I run a cattle ranch about 8 miles south of here, and I've been looking for someone to help with cooking and general household management. My last cook quit 3 weeks ago to try his luck in the silver mines, and I've been eating my own terrible attempts at beans and biscuits ever since." Clara stared at him, her mind struggling to process this sudden reversal of fortune, searching his face for signs of ulterior motives or cruel jest because she had learned the hard way that kindness often came with strings attached. "You want to hire me with a baby? You do see that I have a baby, right?" Jack's mouth quirked into a small smile that softened his rugged features considerably. "I do have working eyes, ma'am. And unless that little fellow is planning to help with the cattle drives, I figure he will mostly just need feeding and watching, which you seem capable of managing while also performing other tasks, given that you've kept him alive this long under what I'm guessing are pretty difficult circumstances." "I don't understand." Clara shifted James to her other hip, the baby having settled down to gum on his tiny fist while studying this new person with wide blue eyes that reminded her painfully of Thomas. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me. I could be a terrible cook. I could rob you blind. I could be running from the law." "Are you running from the law?" Jack asked, crouching down so he was at eye level with her, his expression open and honest, in a way that made something tight in Clara's chest begin to loosen ever so slightly. "No," she admitted, then added with a bitter laugh, "I'm just a widow trying not to starve, which apparently is almost as much of a crime in polite society." Jack nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. I overheard you talking to Pete Samples at the Mercantile yesterday. Heard him tell you that he couldn't possibly employ someone who would need to stop work every few hours to tend to an infant. Heard the judgment in his voice, like somehow your situation was a moral failing rather than simple bad luck. He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. My own mother was widowed when I was 7 years old. She had 3 children and no prospects. And if a rancher named Bill Hutchins had not given her a chance working in his kitchen, I don't know what would have become of us. I figure I owe it to her memory to pay that kindness forward when I see someone in genuine need. The sincerity in his voice made Clara's throat constrict with emotion, and she had to look away, focusing on the dusty street where a freight wagon was rumbling past, pulled by a team of tired-looking mules. She wanted desperately to accept, to grab this lifeline with both hands, but years of hardship had taught her to be cautious. What exactly would you expect from me? And I need you to be straight with me about everything, Mr. Brennan, because I cannot afford any more disappointments. Fair enough. Jack settled back on his heels, his hands resting loosely on his knees in a posture that suggested patience and a willingness to answer whatever question she needed to ask. The job is straightforward. I need someone to cook 3 meals a day for myself and my ranch hands. There are 4 other men who live on the property in the bunkhouse. You would also handle basic cleaning of the main house, which is where you and the baby would live. There's a spare bedroom on the ground floor with a window that catches the morning light, and it's yours for as long as you work for me. Wages would be $20 a month plus room and board, and before you say that's too generous. It's the going rate for a ranch cook in these parts, and the room and board is just practical since I need you on the property to have meals ready on time. $20 a month. Clara felt dizzy at the prospect of such wealth after months of having nothing, but she forced herself to ask the question that had been lurking beneath every interaction with men since Thomas died. And what else would you expect? Because I've had 3 other men offer me positions in the last 2 months, and when I asked for details, it became clear they were not talking about cooking or cleaning. Jack's expression darkened, a flash of anger crossing his features that was clearly not directed at her. I'm offering you honest work, Mrs. Morgan, nothing more and nothing less. You would have your own room with a lock on the door, though I hope in time you would come to trust that such precautions are unnecessary. My ranch hands are decent men who follow a strict code of conduct, and anyone who treated you with anything less than complete respect would find himself unemployed and run off the property before he could blink. He held her gaze steadily. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I give you my word as a man who loved his mother and respects what she endured that you would be safe on my ranch. Clara studied his face for a long moment, trying to reconcile this unexpected kindness with every harsh lesson life had taught her about relying on others. James squirmed in her arms, making the small whimpering sounds that meant he would need to nurse soon, and the practical reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave. She could accept this offer and have food, shelter, and safety for her son, or she could cling to pride and caution and likely end up dead or worse within a week. When framed like that, it was not really a choice at all. When would I start? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack's face broke into a genuine smile that transformed his features and made him look younger and less careworn. How about right now? I've got my horse tied up at the livery and we can ride double back to the ranch. It's not the most comfortable way to travel, but it beats walking, and I figure you could use a decent meal and a real bed sooner rather than later. Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak around the lump in her throat, and let Jack help her to her feet with a gentle hand on her elbow. Her legs shook slightly from exhaustion and relief, and the simple shock of having someone treat her like a person worthy of consideration after so many weeks of being made to feel like a burden and a nuisance. Jack led her down the main street of Tombstone, past the courthouse and the various saloons and gambling halls that never seemed to close, toward the livery stable where a magnificent bay gelding waited patiently tied to the hitching post. This is Copper, Jack said, running an affectionate hand down the horse's neck. He's steady as they come and won't mind carrying extra passengers. He untied the reins and then turned to Clara with a slightly awkward expression. I'm going to need to help you up, and then I'll mount behind you so you can hold the baby secure. Is that acceptable?" "Yes," Clara said, appreciating that he asked rather than simply manhandling her onto the horse. Jack placed his hands on her waist with impersonal efficiency and lifted her into the saddle as if she weighed nothing, which, given how much weight she had lost in recent months, might not have been far from the truth. She settled James in the crook of her left arm and gripped the saddle horn with her right hand, trying not to think about how long it had been since she had ridden a horse or how vulnerable she was about to be with a strange man's arms around her. Jack swung up behind her with the easy grace of someone who had spent most of his life on horseback, and Clara felt the solid warmth of his chest against her back as he reached around her to gather the reins. "Just relax," he said quietly near her ear. "I've got you both. You won't fall." They rode out of Tombstone at an easy pace, heading south across the desert landscape that stretched endlessly in all directions under the vast blue sky. The terrain was harsh and unforgiving, dotted with mesquite and creosote bushes, the occasional saguaro cactus standing sentinel like ancient guardians of this unforgiving land. Clara had lived in Arizona Territory for 2 years now, but she still found the landscape both beautiful and terrifying in its stark emptiness, so different from the green hills of Missouri where she had grown up. "Tell me about your son," Jack said, after they had ridden in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the rhythmic thud of Copper's hooves and the jingle of tack. "What's his name?" "James," Clara replied, looking down at the baby who had fallen asleep against her chest, his tiny face peaceful in a way that made her heart ache with fierce love. "James Thomas Morgan, after his father and grandfather. He's 6 months old, born in March. He's generally a good baby, doesn't cry too much unless he's hungry or needs changing, and he's just starting to sit up on his own. He's a lucky boy to have a mother who fights so hard for him," Jack observed, and there was something in his tone that made Clara glance back at him, catching a glimpse of old pain in his eyes before he looked away toward the horizon. "You said your mother was widowed when you were young," Clara ventured, surprised by her own boldness, but suddenly curious about this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she had been too exhausted to voice. "What happened to your father?" Jack was quiet for long enough that Clara thought perhaps she had overstepped, but then he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of long-ago grief. "Cholera epidemic swept through our town in Texas when I was 7. Killed my father and my baby sister within 3 days of each other. My mother was left with me and my 2 older sisters, a small house, and no money. The town busybodies thought she should give us children to families who could better provide for us, split us up like we were goods to be distributed, rather than a family that belonged together." "That's horrible," Clara breathed, instinctively holding James a little tighter. "She refused," Jack continued, and Clara could hear the pride in his voice. "Said she would work her fingers to the bone before she let anyone separate us. And that's exactly what she did. Bill Hutchins gave her a job in his ranch kitchen, and she worked there for 12 years, cooking and cleaning and doing whatever needed doing. She made sure all 3 of us got some schooling, taught us to read and write and figure numbers. My sisters both married well, found good men who treat them right, and I learned everything I know about ranching from Bill, who was like a second father to me." "That's a good story," Clara said softly. "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Jack agreed, and the past tense made Clara's heart clench. "She passed away 2 years ago, peaceful in her sleep at age 53. Bill Hutchins died 6 months before her, and he left me this ranch in his will. He never married, never had children of his own, and he said I was like the son he never had. So here I am, 28 years old, and running a cattle operation in Arizona Territory, trying to build something lasting and good." Clara absorbed this information, feeling like she understood Jack Brennan better after these few minutes of conversation than she had understood some people she had known for years. He was a man shaped by loss and kindness in equal measure, someone who had been given a chance and wanted to extend the same opportunity to others. It made her want to trust him in a way that was both comforting and terrifying. The ranch came into view as they crested a low rise, and Clara felt her breath catch at the sight spread out before them. The main house was a sturdy adobe structure with a covered porch running along the front, painted white with dark blue trim around the windows and doors. Behind it stood a large barn, several corrals, and a long bunkhouse. Trees that looked like cottonwoods clustered near the buildings, suggesting the presence of water, and Clara could see cattle dotting the rangeland in the distance, small brown shapes against the tawny grass. "It's beautiful," she said honestly, and felt Jack's quiet pleasure at her reaction in the slight relaxation of his posture behind her. "It's home," he said simply. "And now it's your home too for as long as you need it to be." They rode into the ranch yard, and Clara noticed several men working near the barn who stopped to watch their arrival with undisguised curiosity. Jack dismounted first and then helped Clara down with the same careful respect he had shown earlier, making sure she had her balance before releasing her waist. James woke at the movement and began to fuss, his small face scrunching up in the way that meant he would be wailing in approximately 10 seconds. "Gentlemen," Jack called out to his ranch hands, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of authority. "Come over here. I want you to meet someone." 4 men approached, ranging in age from early 20s to perhaps 50, all wearing the practical clothing of working cowboys and studying Clara with expressions that ranged from friendly curiosity to cautious reserve. Jack placed a hand on Clara's shoulder in a gesture that was somehow both protective and respectful. "This is Mrs. Clara Morgan and her son James. Mrs. Morgan is our new cook and housekeeper, and she'll be living in the main house. I expect you all to treat her with complete respect and courtesy. Anyone who has a problem with that can collect his wages and be on his way." The men exchanged glances, and then the oldest one, a weathered cowboy with gray streaking his dark hair and kind eyes set in a deeply lined face, stepped forward and removed his hat. "Ma'am, I'm Charlie Webb, and I can speak for all of us when I say we're mighty pleased to have you here. We've been suffering through Jack's cooking for 3 weeks now, and I'll be straight with you that the man can't boil water without burning it somehow." This drew chuckles from the other men, and a good-natured protest from Jack, and Clara felt some of the tension drain from her shoulders as she recognized genuine friendliness in these weathered faces. The other hands introduced themselves as Miguel Santos, a young Mexican cowboy with an infectious smile, Tommy Reed, a red-haired man about Jack's age with freckles scattered across his sunburned nose, and Frank Morrison, a quiet black man who tipped his hat to her but did not say much beyond a polite greeting. "Nice to meet you all," Clara managed, acutely aware of how bedraggled she must look and how James was now crying in earnest, his small face red with indignation. "I'm sorry, I need to feed him. He's hungry." "Of course," Jack said immediately. "Let me show you to your room, and you can get settled while I see about putting together something for dinner. And before you protest, I mean that you should take the rest of today to rest and get your bearings. You can start your actual duties tomorrow morning." He led her into the house, and Clara had a vague impression of a large main room with comfortable furniture, a stone fireplace, and windows that let in generous amounts of light before Jack was ushering her down a hallway to a bedroom that made her want to weep with relief. It was not large, but it was clean and pleasant, with a proper bed covered in a colorful quilt, a sturdy dresser, a rocking chair near the window, and even a small cradle that looked handmade and well-loved. "That was mine when I was a baby," Jack said, noticing her looking at the cradle. "My mother saved it all these years, and I brought it with me from Texas. I thought it might be useful for James." Clara could not hold back the tears anymore, and they spilled down her cheeks as she looked at this man who was essentially a stranger, but who had shown her more kindness in an hour than she had received in months. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You have no idea what this means to me, what you've done for us." Jack looked uncomfortable with her gratitude, shuffling his feet and glancing away. "It's just a room and a job, Mrs. Morgan. Nothing to cry about." "It's everything," Clara corrected him, holding James against her shoulder and using her free hand to wipe at her tears. "It's safety and hope and a future. It's everything." Jack met her eyes then, and something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words, a recognition of shared experiences with hardship and loss, and the determination to keep moving forward despite everything. "Rest," he said gently. "I'll bring you some food in a little while, and we can talk about household arrangements and expectations tomorrow when you're feeling more yourself." He left, closing the door quietly behind him, and Clara sank down onto the bed with James, feeling the softness of the mattress beneath her, and marveling at the simple luxury of a clean room and a locked door, and the knowledge that she did not have to figure out where she would sleep tonight or how she would feed her son tomorrow. She nursed James, watching his small face relax into contentment as he ate, and then she changed him into the one clean diaper she had left, making a mental note to ask Jack about laundry arrangements. There was a soft knock on the door perhaps an hour later, and Clara opened it to find Jack holding a tray laden with food. "It's not fancy," he warned, "but it's edible. Beef stew and biscuits and coffee. I'm better at stew than most things because you mostly just throw everything in a pot and let it cook." The smell made Clara's stomach growl audibly, reminding her that she had not eaten anything since a handful of stale bread that morning. Jack set the tray on the dresser and then paused, his hand on the doorknob. "If you need anything during the night, my room is at the end of the hall on the left. Don't hesitate to knock if you or James need something." "Thank you, Jack, sis," Clara said, using his first name without thinking about it, and he smiled at her before disappearing back down the hallway. Clara ate every bite of the stew and biscuits, which were actually quite good despite Jack's protestations otherwise, and then she washed James in the basin of water Jack had thoughtfully included on the dresser. She put the baby down in the cradle, watching him drift off to sleep almost immediately, exhausted from the day's excitement. Then Clara stripped off her dusty, travel-stained dress and washed herself as best she could, wishing desperately for a real bath, but knowing that could wait until tomorrow. She climbed into the bed wearing just her chemise and drawers, too tired to care about propriety, and pulled the quilt up to her chin. The sheets smelled like sunshine and soap, and the mattress was soft but supportive, and Clara thought she had never felt anything quite so wonderful as this bed after months of sleeping on the ground or on hard floors in abandoned buildings. She was asleep within minutes, falling into the deep, dreamless rest of someone who had been pushed beyond exhaustion and finally found a safe place to collapse. Morning came with golden light streaming through the window and the sound of James making his small waking up noises in the cradle. Clara sat up slowly, momentarily disoriented, before memory returned, and with it a flood of relief that yesterday had not been a dream. She fed James and changed him into his only other set of clothing, a little gown that was getting too small, and then she dressed herself in the same dusty dress she had worn yesterday, acutely aware that she owned nothing else. There was another knock on the door, and this time when Clara opened it, she found Jack holding a bundle of clothing. "These were my mother's," he said, his voice gruff. "I kept some of her things even though my sister said I should get rid of them. I thought maybe you could use them, at least until you can buy or make some things of your own. She was about your height, though maybe a bit heavier, but I figure you can take things in if you know how to sew." Clara accepted the bundle with hands that trembled slightly. The dresses were simple but well made, practical cotton and calico in colors that would not show every speck of dirt. There were also undergarments, an apron, and even a warm shawl. "I cannot accept these," she said automatically, even as her fingers clutched the soft fabric. "You can and you will," Jack said firmly. "They're doing nobody any good sitting in a trunk, and my mother would have wanted them to go to someone who needed them. She was practical like that. Besides, I cannot have my cook working in a dress that's about to fall apart. Consider it a necessary business expense if it makes you feel better about accepting them." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice, and Jack's expression softened. "Breakfast is a disaster, so whenever you're ready, feel free to take over the kitchen. I'll show you where everything is and explain what supplies we have and how often we get deliveries from town." She changed into one of the dresses, a simple blue calico with long sleeves and a high collar, and found that it fit reasonably well if a bit loose in places where she had lost weight. She fashioned a sling from the shawl to carry James against her chest, leaving her hands free to work, and then she ventured out of her room to explore her new domain. The kitchen was spacious and well-equipped with a large cast-iron stove, plenty of counter space, a good-sized table, and shelves lined with supplies. Jack walked her through everything, showing her the pantry stocked with flour, cornmeal, dried beans, coffee, sugar, salt, and various other staples, the cold cellar where they kept meat and vegetables, the chicken coop where she could collect fresh eggs each morning, and the well that provided their water. "We get a supply run into Tombstone every 2 weeks," Jack explained. "You'll make a list of whatever you need, and either I or one of the hands will go fetch it. We also butcher our own beef as needed, and Miguel keeps a vegetable garden that produces pretty well considering the climate. There's a Mexican woman in Tombstone named Mrs. Alvarez who sells fresh tortillas and peppers, and we try to buy from her when we can because she makes the best food in town." Clara listened carefully, her mind already planning menus and organizing the work that would need to be done. Despite everything she had been through, she felt a spark of purpose igniting in her chest, a sense that she could do this job and do it well. She had been cooking for her family since she was 12 years old, and before James was born, she had taken pride in her abilities in the kitchen. "I'll start with breakfast," she said decisively. "If you could keep an eye on James for a few minutes, I'll have something ready within the hour." Jack looked uncertain. "I've never actually held a baby before. What if I drop him?" "You won't drop him," Clara assured him, untying the sling and carefully transferring James to Jack's arms, showing him how to support the baby's head and hold him securely against his chest. Jack looked down at the infant with an expression of pure panic mixed with wonder, and Clara had to suppress a smile at the sight of this capable rancher rendered nervous by 6 months of baby. "He's so small," Jack said quietly, one large finger coming up to touch James's tiny hand, which immediately wrapped around it with the instinctive grip of infancy. "He's stronger than he looks," Clara said, "just like his mother." She turned to the stove and set to work, finding comfort in the familiar rhythms of cooking. She made biscuits from scratch, working the dough with experienced hands, and fried up eggs and bacon, and made a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. By the time she rang the bell to call the hands in for breakfast, the kitchen smelled like heaven, and the table was laden with more food than Jack's Cowboys had probably seen in weeks. The men ate with obvious appreciation, shoveling in food between enthusiastic compliments, and Clara felt a warm glow of satisfaction at their reactions. This was something she was good at, something she could control and take pride in, and she had not realized how much she missed that feeling until it flooded back through her. The days fell into a pattern after that, a rhythm that felt almost like peace, like Clara rose early to start coffee and breakfast, fed and tended James while food cooked, served the hands and Jack, cleaned up the kitchen, prepared lunch, did laundry and mending and cleaning, made dinner, and fell into bed exhausted but with the good tiredness of honest work rather than the grinding exhaustion of desperation and fear. Jack was a considerate employer, always asking if she needed anything, careful never to make demands or speak harshly, quick to thank her for her work. He also proved to be surprisingly good with James, often offering to hold the baby while Clara cooked or hang clothes to dry, and she would look up to see the rancher walking around the yard with her son cradled carefully in his arms, talking to him about cattle and horses and the land as if James could understand every word. The ranch hands treated her with perfect courtesy, careful never to curse or speak crudely in her presence, always respectful, occasionally helping with tasks like hauling water or carrying heavy pots. Charlie Webb turned out to be a talented woodworker who made James a set of small wooden toys. Miguel taught her how to make proper tortillas and enchiladas using his grandmother's recipes. Tommy had a gift with horses and promised to teach her to ride again when she had time. Frank said little, but always tipped his hat to her, and one day left a bouquet of wildflowers on the kitchen table with no note or explanation. 3 weeks after her arrival, Clara was in the kitchen making bread when Jack came in through the back door, his face troubled. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "One of our line camps up in the foothills just sent word that they spotted what looks like Apache raiders passing through the area. Nothing has happened yet, but I need to take most of the hands and ride up there to check on things and make sure our cattle are secure." Clara's hands stilled in the bread dough, fear lancing through her. Relations between white settlers and the Apache had been tense for years, with violence erupting periodically despite efforts at peace. "How long will you be gone?" 3 days, maybe 4, Jack said. I'll leave Frank here to watch the ranch and be an extra set of hands if you need help with anything. I would not go except this is important and I cannot afford to lose cattle to raiders. I understand, Clara said, though her voice was tight with worry. We'll be fine. Jack stepped closer, his eyes searching her face. If anything happens, if anyone threatens you or makes you feel unsafe, you get yourself and James into the root cellar and lock it from inside. There's a shotgun in my room, top shelf of the wardrobe, and it's loaded. Do you know how to shoot? Thomas taught me, Clara admitted. I'm not an expert, but I can hit what I'm aiming at if I need to. Hopefully it won't come to that, Jack said, but he showed her the gun anyway and made sure she knew how to work it. His hand lingered on her shoulder for just a moment longer than necessary, and Clara felt something shift between them. A charge in the air that had been building slowly over the past 3 weeks, but which neither of them had acknowledged. Be careful, she said quietly, looking up into his hazel eyes and seeing her own worry reflected back at her. Always am, Jack replied, but the slight smile that accompanied the words did not quite reach his eyes. He rode out an hour later with Charlie, Miguel, and Tommy, their saddlebags packed with supplies and rifles in their scabbards. Clara stood on the porch holding James and watching them disappear into the distance, trying to ignore the cold dread settling in her stomach. The first 2 days passed uneventfully. Clara maintained her usual routine, cooking for herself and Frank, who proved to be even more quiet when it was just the two of them, but also surprisingly helpful, anticipating tasks that needed doing and completing them without being asked. She caught him several times watching the horizon with the alert stillness of someone expecting trouble, and it did nothing to ease her anxiety. On the 3rd day, James developed a fever. It started as unusual fussiness during his morning feeding and progressed rapidly to hot skin and listless crying that made Clara's heart clench with terror. She had seen too many babies die of fevers and sickness during her time in the West, had attended too many tiny funerals, and the thought of losing James after everything they had survived was unbearable. She tried everything she knew, sponging him with cool water, trying to get him to nurse to keep him hydrated, rocking him and singing to him and praying desperately to a God she was not sure was listening. Frank found her in tears in the kitchen around noon, James wailing weakly in her arms, and his normally impassive face showed genuine concern. There's a Mexican woman about 2 miles from here, Frank said in his quiet, measured way. Widow name of Maria Delgado. She's known as a healer, helped birth half the babies in this part of the territory and knows more about medicine than any doctor. I could ride over and fetch her if you want. Yes, please, Clara gasped, clutching at this small hope. Please hurry. Frank was gone within 5 minutes, and Clara resumed her desperate ministrations to James, who seemed to be getting worse rather than better. His small body was burning up despite the cool water, and he had stopped crying, which was somehow worse than the wailing because it suggested he did not even have the energy to protest his discomfort. Frank returned within the hour with a small, round Mexican woman who moved with the brisk efficiency of someone who had dealt with countless emergencies. Maria Delgado took one look at James and immediately began issuing instructions in accented but clear English, sending Frank to fetch certain herbs from her bag and Clara to boil water. He has the lung fever, Maria announced after a thorough examination, her weathered face grave. It is serious, but we can fight it. You must do exactly as I say, and we must work through the night. This will be difficult, but your baby is strong. I can see it in him. Clara would have agreed to anything, and she spent the next 12 hours following Maria's instructions with desperate precision. They made poultices for James's chest, brewed teas from herbs with names Clara did not know, steamed the room to help him breathe, and took turns holding him upright to ease the congestion in his tiny lungs. Maria told stories as they worked, tales of other babies she had saved, other mothers she had helped, her voice a soothing counterpoint to Clara's fear. Somewhere around 3 a.m, James's fever finally broke. He took a full feeding for the first time in almost 24 hours, and then fell into a real sleep rather than the frightening, half-unconscious state he had been in. Clara sat in the rocking chair with her son against her chest and wept with relief, the tears streaming down her face while Maria patted her shoulder with gentle understanding. "You are a good mother," Maria said softly. "Your baby is lucky to have you fighting for him." "Thank you," Clara whispered, the words entirely inadequate for what this woman had done. "I cannot pay you much, but I will find a way to give you something." Maria waved a hand dismissively. "Frank will pay me with beef from the ranch. We already discussed. You just focus on keeping this little one well. And you should know, you have a good situation here with Mr. Brennan. He is a man of honor, rare in these times. You hold on to that." There was something knowing in the way Maria looked at her, and Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks even through her exhaustion. "He's my employer, nothing more." "For now," Maria said with a small smile. "But I have seen the way men look at women they care for, and I saw his face when he spoke of you before he left. You have been hurt, I think, and so you are cautious. That is wise, but do not let caution keep you from living when the time is right." Maria left as the sun was rising, refusing to stay for breakfast despite Clara's insistence, and Frank rode with her to make sure she got home safely. Clara dozed in the rocking chair with James, too afraid to put him down even though he seemed to be truly on the mend. And that was how Jack found her when he returned around mid-morning. "Clara?" His voice was sharp with concern, and she jerked awake to find him kneeling beside the rocking chair, his face covered in trail dust and his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Frank told me what happened. Is he all right? Are you all right?" "We're fine now," Clara said, her voice hoarse from exhaustion and crying. "He had lung fever, but Maria Delgado came and helped, and his fever broke early this morning. He's going to be fine." Jack reached out and gently touched James's small head with one calloused finger, his relief palpable. "Thank God. I should never have left. If something had happened to either of you while I was gone—" He trailed off, his jaw clenching. "You could not have known he would get sick," Clara said reasonably, though part of her had been thinking the exact same thing during the worst of the crisis. "And you had to protect your ranch. That's your responsibility." "You're my responsibility too," Jack said fiercely, looking up at her with blazing eyes. "You and James both. I brought you here, promised you would be safe, and then I left you when you needed help. Frank was here, and he got Maria, and everything turned out fine," Clara pointed out. But something warm was unfurling in her chest at Jack's words and the emotion behind them. "You cannot protect us from every possible harm, Jack. Life doesn't work that way." He stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration that Clara was coming to recognize. "You look dead on your feet. Go sleep. I'll watch James." "I cannot ask you to do that," Clara protested automatically, even though exhaustion was pulling at her like an undertow. "You just got back from days on the trail. You must be tired too." "I'll sleep later," Jack said in a tone that brooked no argument. "Right now, I need you to trust me enough to let me take care of things for a few hours. Can you do that?" Clara met his eyes and saw genuine concern there, a determination to help that had nothing to do with employer and employee and everything to do with something deeper that neither of them had yet named. Slowly she nodded and carefully transferred James to Jack's arms, showing him again how to hold the baby properly, even though he had gotten much better at it over the past few weeks. She stumbled to her room and fell onto the bed fully clothed, asleep almost before her head hit the pillow. When she woke, the light slanting through the window suggested it was late afternoon, meaning she had slept for almost 6 hours. She sat up in a panic, wondering about James, and rushed out to the main room to find Jack sitting in a chair with her son cradled in the crook of one arm while he did paperwork with his other hand, the very picture of calm competence. "You should have woken me," Clara said, though her protest was half-hearted at best. "You needed rest," Jack replied, looking up from his papers with a slight smile. "And James and I have been getting along just fine. He ate once about 2 hours ago, so I figured I would let you sleep until he got hungry again, rather than wake you unnecessarily." Clara crossed the room and held out her arms for James, and Jack transferred him over with an ease that came from increasing practice. The baby did indeed seem hungry, fussing and rooting against her chest, and Clara retreated to her room to feed him while trying to sort through the tumble of emotions in her chest. She had been alone for so long, fighting so hard just to survive, that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone care about her well-being, to have someone she could rely on when things went wrong. Thomas had been a good husband, but their marriage had been more practical than passionate, two people joining forces to face the hardships of frontier life together. What she was starting to feel for Jack was different, more intense, built on a foundation of genuine respect and growing affection that made her heart race and her thoughts scatter whenever he was near. But she was still his employee, still dependent on him for her survival and James's, and Clara could not forget the power imbalance that made any romantic feelings potentially dangerous. She had learned the hard way that vulnerability could be exploited, that kindness could be a mask for ulterior motives, and even though everything she had seen of Jack suggested he was genuinely honorable, she could not quite silence the voice of caution in her head. The next few weeks passed in a haze of work and routine, but there was a new awareness between Clara and Jack, a careful dance of attraction and restraint that neither acknowledged openly but which colored every interaction. Jack found excuses to spend time in the kitchen, helping with tasks he had never bothered with before, their hands brushing as they reached for the same dish or tool. Clara caught herself watching him when he did not know she was looking, admiring the way he moved with unconscious grace, the sound of his laughter when one of the hands told a joke, the gentle patience he showed with James. It was Charlie who finally said something, cornering Clara in the kitchen one morning after breakfast while Jack was out checking on the cattle. "I have known Jack Brennan for 5 years," the older cowboy said without preamble, "and I have never seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you. Just thought you should know that in case you were wondering." Clara felt her cheeks flame. "Charlie, it's not appropriate. I work for him, and I have James to think about. I cannot afford to lose this position over some foolish romantic notion." Charlie's weathered face creased into a knowing smile. "Jack would never fire you for not returning his feelings if that's what you're worried about. He's not that kind of man, but I also do not think you are uninterested, judging by the way you watch him when you think nobody notices. All I am saying is that life is short and uncertain, especially out here, and sometimes you have to take a chance on happiness when it presents itself." Before Clara could formulate a response, Charlie tipped his hat and sauntered out of the kitchen, leaving her alone with her churning thoughts and the dishwater getting cold in the basin. She knew he was right, knew that she was developing feelings for Jack that went far beyond gratitude or professional respect, but she was terrified of taking that leap and having everything come crashing down around her. The moment of decision came on a crisp November evening when the hands had all retired to the bunkhouse, and James was asleep in his cradle. Clara was sitting on the porch in the rocking chair Jack had moved out there for her, wrapped in a shawl against the cooling air and watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. She heard Jack's footsteps behind her but did not turn, and he settled into the other chair with a soft sigh of contentment. "Beautiful night," he observed, and Clara nodded in agreement. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes before Jack spoke again, his voice careful and measured. "Clara, I need to tell you something, and I want you to listen without interrupting until I am finished. Can you do that for me?" Clara's heart began to pound, but she nodded, not trusting her voice. Jack took a deep breath, his hands gripping the arms of his chair as if bracing himself. "When I offered you this job, it was because you needed help, and I was in a position to provide it. That was the truth, and my intentions were completely honorable. But somewhere over the past 2 months, my feelings have changed into something I did not expect and was not looking for. I have come to care for you deeply, Clara. I care about your happiness, your well-being, your dreams for the future. I find myself thinking about you when I should be focused on cattle numbers and fence repairs. I look for excuses to be near you, to hear your voice, to see you smile. And I love James like he was my own son, which I realize is a presumptuous thing to say about another man's child, but it is the truth." He paused, And Clara could hear the emotion roughening his voice as he continued, I am not asking you to feel the same way. I know you have been through hell, and that you are still healing from losing your husband and everything you endured after his death. I know that you might see me as just your employer, or that you might not be interested in me as anything more than that. And that is fine. I promise you that nothing will change in terms of your position here or how you are treated, regardless of how you respond to what I'm telling you. But I could not keep silent any longer without feeling like a coward. You deserve to know the truth about my feelings. Clara sat frozen, her mind reeling, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Part of her wanted to run, to retreat to the safety of emotional distance and professional boundaries. But a larger part, the part that had been slowly awakening over the past 2 months, wanted desperately to reach out and grab this chance at happiness with both hands. Can I speak now? She asked quietly, and Jack nodded, his face pale in the growing darkness. I thought I was broken, Clara said, choosing her words carefully. After Thomas died and I lost everything, after I was rejected and dismissed and treated like something shameful by nearly everyone I encountered, I thought I would never feel anything again except fear and exhaustion. I thought the part of me that could love or hope or dream had died somewhere on the streets of Tombstone, but then you appeared like something out of a storybook, offering help when I needed it most, treating me with respect and kindness, showing me that there are still good people in this world. She turned to look at him, meeting his eyes, even though she could barely see them in the darkness. You made me feel human again, Jack. You made me remember that I am more than just a desperate widow with a baby. And somewhere along the way, I started feeling things I thought I would never feel again, started looking forward to seeing you in the morning, started noticing the way your eyes crinkle when you smile and how gentle you are with James, and how you always make sure I have enough help without making me feel incapable. She stood up from the rocking chair and crossed the small distance between them, and Jack rose to meet her, his eyes searching her face in the starlight. I am terrified, Clara admitted, her voice shaking slightly. I am terrified of being vulnerable again, of trusting someone with my heart, of losing everything if this goes wrong. But I am even more terrified of letting fear keep me from something that could be wonderful. So yes, Jack Brennan, I feel the same way you do. And I do not know what that means for us or where this goes. But I would like to find out if you're willing to be patient with me while I learn how to trust again. Jack's face split into a smile that was visible even in the darkness, and he reached up to cup her face with both hands, his touch gentle and reverent. I will be as patient as you need me to be. We can take this as slow as you want. I'm not going anywhere, Clara. I promise you that. He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and brushed his lips against hers in a kiss that was tender and sweet and full of promise. Clara felt something break open inside her, all the fear and pain and loneliness of the past months cracking apart to let in light and hope and the possibility of joy. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his chest where she could feel his heart pounding as fast as her own, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt truly safe. They pulled apart after a moment, and Jack rested his forehead against hers, his breathing slightly unsteady. I have wanted to do that for weeks, he confessed, and Clara laughed, the sound startling her with its genuine happiness. I am glad you finally did, she said, and then they were kissing again, less tentatively this time, learning the shape and taste of each other while the stars wheeled overhead and the night settled around them like a blessing. Their courtship over the following months was sweet and careful. Two people learning to trust each other with their hearts while navigating the practicalities of frontier life. Jack made it clear to everyone that Clara's position in his household was changing, that she was no longer just his employee but the woman he was courting with honorable intentions. The ranch hands accepted this development with good-natured teasing and obvious approval, and Charlie Webb took every opportunity to remind Jack that he had been right about everything. Jack courted Clara properly, despite the fact that they lived in the same house, riding with her into town so she could buy fabric for new dresses, bringing her small gifts like books and ribbons and a new rocking chair with more comfortable cushions, taking her on picnics when the weather permitted with James babbling happily from his basket. He asked permission before every kiss, never pushed for more than she was ready to give, and made it abundantly clear through both words and actions that he respected her and valued her as an equal partner rather than as a possession or convenience. Clara found herself blooming under this attention like a flower given water after a drought. She laughed more, smiled more, started making plans for a future that extended beyond just surviving day to day. She taught Jack how to make proper pie crust and let him help with baking even though he made a mess of the kitchen. She learned to ride Copper under Jack's patient instruction while he held James and called out encouragements. She sat with him on the porch in the evenings and talked about everything and nothing, learning the stories of his life while sharing her own history, the good and the bad, building the foundation of intimacy that came from truly knowing another person. On a mild evening in late February, almost 5 months after Clara had arrived at the ranch, Jack asked her to walk with him after dinner. They strolled out past the corrals toward a small rise that overlooked the ranch buildings, and Jack was unusually quiet, his hand warm and slightly sweaty where it held hers. When they reached the top of the rise, he stopped and turned to face her, and Clara saw nervousness and hope warring in his expression. "Clara Morgan, I am not a man given to fancy speeches or flowery words, Jack began, his voice steady despite the emotion Clara could see in his eyes. I am just a cowboy trying to build a life on this harsh land, and I know I cannot offer you luxury or ease or safety from all the hardships that come with frontier living. But I can offer you my heart completely and without reservation. I can offer you partnership and respect and love that will not falter no matter what challenges we face. I can offer James a father who will raise him as his own and never make him feel like anything less than a true son. I can offer you a home and a future and a family if you will have me." He dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket and opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the dying light. "Will you marry me, Clara? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you as happy as you have made me?" Clara felt tears streaming down her face, but they were good tears, joyful tears, the kind that came from overwhelming emotion rather than pain. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with happiness. "Yes, Jack, I will marry you. I love you, and I want to build a life with you." Jack stood and swept her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her dizzy, and holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and Clara kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into that embrace. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and laughing, Jack slipped the ring onto her finger and then kissed her hand with such tenderness that Clara felt her heart might burst. They were married in Tombstone 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. Clara wore a new dress of cream-colored silk that Jack had ordered specially from San Francisco, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Miguel had gathered from the rangeland. All the ranch hands attended, dressed in their best clothes and clearly thrilled for their employer and the woman who had become like family to them. Maria Delgado came with her extended family, hugging Clara and whispering blessings in Spanish. Even Pete Samples from the Mercantile attended, looking vaguely ashamed when Clara met his eyes, perhaps remembering how he had dismissed her pleas for work just months earlier. Jack stood at the altar looking handsome and nervous in a black suit, his hair freshly cut and his face cleanly shaved, and when Clara walked down the aisle carrying James, she saw his eyes fill with tears. They spoke their vows with voices that shook with emotion, promising to love and honor and cherish each other for as long as they both lived, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jack kissed her with such joy that the small congregation broke into spontaneous applause and cheering. The reception was held at the ranch with tables set up in the yard, and food enough to feed the small army of friends and neighbors who had come to celebrate. There was dancing and laughter and toasts with whiskey that burned going down, and Clara felt like she might float away from sheer happiness as Jack spun her around the makeshift dance floor while James slept peacefully in Charlie Webb's arms. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Jack led Clara away from the festivities toward the house. He had moved his belongings into the spare room earlier that week, insisting that Clara keep the larger bedroom with its better light for James, and Clara had been touched by this consideration even as she looked forward to no longer sleeping alone. They put James to bed together in the cradle that had once held Jack as a baby, and then Jack took Clara's hand and led her to the bedroom they would now share. He was gentle and patient as he helped her out of the cream silk dress, his hands trembling slightly as he unlaced her corset and ran his fingers over skin that had not been touched by a man since Thomas died. Clara undressed him in turn, mapping the planes of his chest and the muscles of his arms, learning him through touch in the way that newlyweds had done since time immemorial. They came together with tenderness and passion, taking their time, murmuring words of love and devotion, and afterward Clara lay in Jack's arms feeling more complete than she had ever felt in her life. "I love you," she whispered against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "I love you too," Jack replied, his arms tightening around her. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, on us. I promise I will spend every day trying to be worthy of the trust you have placed in me." "You already are," Clara assured him, tilting her head up to kiss him again. "You saved my life, Jack. You and James are my whole world." "And you are mine," Jack said softly, "or both of you. My family." The years that followed were not without challenges because life on the frontier never was, but Clara and Jack faced everything together with the strength that came from true partnership. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, with Clara managing the household finances and Jack overseeing the cattle operation. James grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed Jack around like a shadow and called him Papa with absolute certainty that this was his father in every way that mattered. 2 years after their wedding, Clara gave birth to twin boys they named William and Henry, and Jack was present for the birth despite Maria Delgado's protests that men had no place in the birthing room. He held Clara's hand through the long labor and wept openly when he held his sons for the first time, overwhelmed by the miracle of these small lives he had helped create. James proved to be a wonderful older brother, gentle with the babies and proud of his role in helping care for them. As the boys grew, there was never any distinction made between James and his younger brothers. Jack loved all three with equal fierce devotion, and anyone who suggested that James was somehow less than a true Brennan son found themselves on the receiving end of Jack's considerable temper. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Jack hired more hands and expanded their herd, always treating his employees with the same fairness and respect he had shown Clara that first day in Tombstone. Clara became known throughout the area for her kindness and hospitality, always willing to help a neighbor in need, never forgetting what it felt like to be desperate and alone. They added on to the house as the family grew, building more bedrooms and a larger kitchen and a parlor where Clara could entertain guests. Jack brought in timber from the mountains to create covered walkways between buildings so Clara would not have to walk through rain or heat when going about her daily tasks. He planted more trees around the house to provide shade and built a small gazebo where they could sit together in the evenings and watch their sons play in the yard. On a warm spring evening in 1890, 8 years after that fateful day in Tombstone, Clara and Jack sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. James was now 9 years old, tall and sturdy, with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes helping his younger brothers build something complicated with wooden blocks. The twins were 6, as different as night and day despite being identical in appearance, William thoughtful and quiet while Henry was all energy and mischief. "Do you remember the day we met?" Jack asked, his arm around Clara's shoulders as she leaned against him. "Every detail," Clara replied, smiling at the memory. I was sitting on the steps of the Silver Spur Saloon, convinced my life was over, and then you appeared and changed everything. Best decision I ever made, hiring you on the spot like that, Jack said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Though I will admit my motives were not entirely pure even then. You were beautiful, even covered in dust and desperation, and I think I was half in love with you before I even knew your name. Clara laughed and swatted his chest playfully. Liar. You felt sorry for me and wanted to help because you were fundamentally a good man who cannot stand to see people suffering when you have the means to ease their burden. That too, Jack conceded. But also you were beautiful. Still are. More so now, if that is possible. Flatterer, Clara accused. But she was smiling as she turned her face up for a kiss. Papa, Mama, look what we built, Henry called out, pointing proudly at the precarious tower of blocks that looked like it might topple at any moment. That's wonderful, boys, Clara called back, and Jack added his own praise, making all three of their sons grin with pleasure. Clara looked around at the ranch that had become her home, at the children playing in the yard, at the man whose steadfast love had given her back her life, and felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. She thought about the woman she had been 8 years ago, broken and desperate and convinced that nobody would ever give her a chance. She thought about the words that had felt like a final verdict. Nobody will hire a woman with a baby. And the miracle of Jack's response, you're hired starting today. Those simple words had changed everything, had given her not just employment, but hope. Not just survival, but a future. Not just a house, but a home filled with love and laughter and the sweet chaos of family life. She had never imagined she could be this happy, this content, this blessed with abundance in all the ways that truly mattered. What are you thinking about? Jack asked, his voice soft in her ear. How lucky I am, Clara replied honestly. How grateful I am that you saw past my circumstances to the person I could be given a chance. How much I love you and our life together. I am the lucky one, Jack countered, tightening his arm around her. You brought light and warmth into my life when I did not even realize how lonely I was. You gave me a family and a purpose beyond just running cattle and making money. You made this house a home. They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower and the stars began to emerge, their sons playing happily in the yard, the ranch settling into evening quiet around them. Clara knew that tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, that life would continue with its mixture of hardship and blessing, but she also knew with absolute certainty that she could face anything as long as Jack was beside her. I love you, Jack Brennan, she said softly, and he smiled that smile that still made her heart skip a beat, even after 8 years of marriage. I love you too, Clara Brennan, he replied, today, tomorrow, and always. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and the sounds of their children's laughter drifted on the evening breeze, Clara felt a profound sense of peace settle over her like a benediction. She had traveled so far from that desperate woman on the saloon steps, had grown and healed and learned to trust and love again. She had found her place in this harsh, beautiful land, had built a life that was richer and fuller than anything she had dared to dream during those dark days in Tombstone. The story that had begun with defeat and despair had transformed into one of hope and redemption and enduring love. The woman who thought nobody would hire her had found not just employment but a partner who valued her, respected her, and loved her with a devotion that never wavered. The baby she had clutched so desperately had grown into a bright, happy boy surrounded by family and security, and the cowboy who had offered her a chance that day had become her husband, her best friend, her home. It was a happy ending, hard won through courage and kindness and the willingness to take a chance on love when it presented itself unexpectedly on a dusty street in the Arizona Territory. And as Clara sat wrapped in Jack's arms under the emerging stars, surrounded by everything that mattered most in the world, she knew with absolute certainty that their story was far from over. There would be many more chapters to write, many more years of joy and challenge and growth, many more memories to create together as a family. But for now, in this perfect moment, with the man she loved beside her and their children's laughter filling the air, Clara was simply grateful for the journey that had brought her here and excited for all the tomorrows yet to come. The Wild West had tested her, broken her, and ultimately given her more than she had ever imagined possible. And it had all started with 5 simple words from a cowboy with a kind heart and a willingness to see the potential in a desperate woman with a baby. "You're hired starting today." Those words had changed her life, had given her everything she now held dear, had opened the door to a future bright with promise, and Clara would spend the rest of her days grateful to the man who had spoken them, and to the love that had grown from such unlikely beginnings into something strong and beautiful and enduring. As darkness fell and Jack called the boys inside for bed, Clara took one last look at the ranch spread out before her home in every sense of the word, and smiled. Life was good. Life was full. Life was exactly what it should be. And tomorrow would bring new adventures, new joys, new opportunities to love and be loved by the remarkable man who had given her a second chance at happiness. The end had become a beginning, and that beginning had blossomed into a life more wonderful than any storybook romance. And they all lived happily ever after together in the wild and beautiful land that had brought them together and made them a family.